Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar from the Office for Prevention of Family and Domestic Violence. My name is Nicole Leggett, and I'm going to take you through an update around the work of the Office, more particularly around the Family and Domestic Violence System Reform Plan. And today we actually have a special guest presenter from the RUA Community Services, which is Suzanne Blythe, and she's going to talk to us about the RUA Centre for Women and Children. I'll just ask my team to flick to the next slide. So today I'm going to give you some information about 16 Days in WA, which, if you could possibly believe it, is virtually around the corner, where we are up to with System Reform Plan implementation, an update on the Lived Experience Advisory Group, and I also wanted to signal that for our next webinar we've arranged for either the Commissioner herself or someone from her office to speak about the legislation that's currently being considered around changes to the Restraining Orders Act in relation to coercive control and electronic monitoring. So that will be at our next webinar. Before we get started though, please can I acknowledge that I am joining you today from Woollya, Pamwodjak Noongar Budja, and extend my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge that many of you will be joining us on different lands around Western Australia, and also extend my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands that you are all joining us from today for this webinar. So I guess just straight off the top, I really wanted to just signpost that we are starting work already on 16 Days in WA. The campaign runs annually between 25th of November, which is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and the 10th of December, which is Human Rights Day. And as you would all know and probably be familiar, throughout the campaign period, there's a range of events, activities and media that try to raise awareness about gender-based violence and encourage and educate people about the ways that they can be involved in creating change in their own lives, including in their families, peer networks and community. This year, we are actually retaining the theme from last year, Play Your Part. We actually found that that resonated quite widely with the WA community when we did our evaluation work, and because it worked well across so many different settings and engendered a lot of action and activity, we wanted to retain it for 2024. So you'll see that same theme really sit with and underscore this year's campaign as it did last year. Also, same as last year, we had small grants available to community service organisations and Aboriginal community controlled organisations to support community-based 16 Days in WA events. We will promote those grants when they become available via the distribution list for this webinar, as you can expect to receive them through your other existing networks as well. So I guess through this channel and through other communication networks, you'll start to see more information about 16 Days as we progress with our planning, but I will continue to use this webinar as an opportunity to give you updates in this space about different ways that you can get involved in the campaign. So at our last webinar, I provided quite a detailed briefing about progress of work around the system reform plan implementation. I haven't got as detailed an update for you today because we did spend quite a lot of time on it last time, but I did want to touch base around some of the things that I spoke about in our last monthly webinar, really just to give you an update on where they're sitting in respect of their progress. So at the last webinar, I talked to you about 4 projects having requests in the market seeking consultancy support to progress and support their development. All of those 4 tenders have closed, and all of them are in the procurement process and working towards finalisation. So in between this webinar and the next, you will get advice about the contract awards. So who will be taking forward some of this work with communities and with a working group of representatives from community sector, from government and from Aboriginal community controlled organisations. So those 4 things in particular is a contract around redeveloping the Common Risk Assessment and Risk Management Framework, a dedicated project around an Aboriginal family violence risk assessment tool, design work for the family and domestic violence workforce entities. So that's really specifically about doing a piece of co-design work around what this entity looks like and how it should run and operate. Developing a workforce capability framework for WA that sets those standards around knowledge and skills across all of our workforces, including mainstream and specialist government and non-government, around their roles and responsibilities for responding to family and domestic violence. And in addition to that, we are progressing other projects, of which I've signalled 4 here. This is not all of the work, it's just 4 that really, I suppose, came top of mind to me in terms of planning for this webinar. But you can expect that we will be releasing on Tenders WA a request for update to the perpetrator practice standards. So for those of you who are familiar, we have practice standards for perpetrator intervention currently. They were developed in 2015 and haven't been updated since that time. So it feels like now is the time, as it relates to the system reform plan, to really take a closer look at that area of practice and think about what those quality standards are that we really need to sit underneath all of our intervention work with perpetrators, inclusive of specific men's behaviour change programs. We are doing a piece of scoping work around services for children and young people. So I've mentioned this at a webinar probably 2 months ago now, but it's something that we will circulate more information about in following this webinar in terms of how people can get involved. But essentially it's an exercise to inform future state planning. So really we're going to take a detailed look at what services are currently available for children and young people in Western Australia, do mapping around need and unmet demand, do mapping around what investment looks like in other jurisdictions. We will be looking at what is the relevant evidence about the needs of children and young people who've been exposed to family and domestic violence, and also evidence about what works in terms of supports and services. So the intention around this piece of work will provide a foundation and basis to inform our forward and future planning. So the Department of Communities is working with the Australian Childhood Foundation on this piece of work. And we're just at the very beginning stages. And so what you can expect to receive out of session is an update that gives you detail about how that will come together and what the opportunities to input will look like. Similarly, there is work progressing in the information sharing space. As many of you will have heard me talk about previously, information sharing was one of the discrete pillars of the system reform plan, and there are a range of actions that sit in that space that get us to a much more, I guess, sophisticated and systematized approach to sharing information and data. But there's also actions in there that are more about the here and now and how we can do better in our current parameters and current databases. So there's a piece of work that the Centre for Women's Safety and Wellbeing will be leading around how can we support and enhance information sharing practice within our current and existing legislative frameworks. How can we support data sharing in a way that helps us to inform both our policy responses to family and domestic violence, but also our operational responses. And again, another piece of work that the Centre for Women's Safety and Wellbeing are leading is actually about upgrades to the Specialist Homelessness Services information platform to make sure that that is actually giving us the best opportunity to capture the information that we need about our clients, particularly clients in refuge, safe at home, mobile outreach programs, and also that we are enabling information sharing within that system. So where we have services who are working with someone who's previously been supported by another family violence specialist service, that there is a mechanism or a pathway for that information to be shared. I suppose I also wanted to provide a brief update around governance of the system reform plan. At the last webinar, I spoke about the structure for those governance arrangements and you would know that we have convened an implementation oversight group, which is co-chaired by Mike Rowe, the Director General of Communities, and Alison Evans, the CEO of the Centre for Women's Safety and Wellbeing. What we are actively working on at the moment is convening the next tier of that governance, which relates to the working groups that will have much more focused responsibility on program and policy delivery that sits under the system reform plan. So there will be 4 working groups, 1 for each pillar. So 1 on risk assessment, 1 on risk management, 1 on workforce development, 1 on information sharing. They will be comprised of representatives from government and non-government, including community sector and Aboriginal community controlled organisations. And we're just working through a process at the moment of identifying and looking at the membership for those groups and how we get those 4 groups, I guess, off on the right foot in terms of understanding the program of work that they will have carriage of, as well as how they sit with each other and work across groups, as well as how they engage the sector more broadly in the various consultation and design processes. So it's a little bit of a layered kind of approach, as well as thinking about how they can inform and complement each other. So that is work that we are doing at the moment, particularly with the oversight group members and the Centre for Women's Safety and Wellbeing, and that will be information that comes out after this webinar as well. So you'll get information updates outside of the webinars on some of these things, because they're sort of getting to that point where we're ready to start talking to everyone about it and start engaging people in it. The other thing that has been a welcome development since the last webinar is that we have released the expression of interest for the Lived Experience Advisory Group. So many of you may have seen the announcement that came from the Minister for Prevention of Family and Domestic Violence last Wednesday. So the government has committed to establishing a Lived Experience Advisory Group, which will provide advice to the Minister for Prevention of Family and Domestic Violence. The group will, well, what I should say first up is that the terms of reference for this group and the design of the model for how it works very strongly draws on the work that QuabUp Consultancy undertook last year as part of the terms of reference of the task force, and the QuabUp report is available on the webpage that is promoting the Lived Experience Advisory Group. So for anybody who is keen and interested to get into the detail around what people said about how they wanted a lived experience group to operate, that QuabUp report is available, and the learnings from that report are reflected in the terms of reference document, which is also available online. So the expression of interest process is currently open. It's closing on the 14th of August. There is an online expression of interest form that people are asked to fill in, but we have engaged Carla Barper to support people with their applications. So if you are connected with someone who is interested in being part of the Lived Experience Advisory Group but isn't confident about doing the application on their own, they can contact Carla Barper, and all those details are on the web page, and there'll be an opportunity to talk about what the group is all about, but also to receive some direct assistance in the application. Sorry, excuse me, I just lost my train of thought. So with the Lived Experience Group, once the application's closed, then it will move into an assessment process, and then there's a formal process for appointing people. So we are expecting that the group will be convened and have their first meeting later on in the year in Q4, just to provide time for those processes to all play out in a way that gives us a good opportunity to consider all of the applications that we receive. So as with all of our webinars, I would encourage people to post any questions that they have in the chat, and we'll attend to them at the end of the session. And if for whatever reason we don't get to all of the questions, then we'll provide a written answer when we send the slides around. So I think that was all of my slides. Just checking with the team, that's right. So I'm going to hand over to Suzanne now from Rural Community Services, who's going to talk to us about the Rural Centre for Women and Children. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thanks, Nicole, and thank you so much, everyone, for the opportunity to talk today about the Rural Centre for Women and Children, and specifically the Carl-Up service within that. If we can just flick to the next slide, I guess just to give some context and some background as to where the Rural Centre for Women and Children came from and how we sort of landed around this model. It was really about that breaking the cycle piece. So obviously everyone on this webinar today would understand the context and are doing so much work, particularly in that prevention and crisis space that we all work in. And I guess what we see in that space is quite often women returning to violence, whether that be into a new relationship or returning to their perpetrator in that space. So I guess when we were sort of looking at the Rural Centre for Women and Children and how we wanted to work in that, we considered how we'd worked with the 50 Lives, 50 Homes project and really having some of those tangible outcomes in that space. And obviously then transferring that over to the FDV side of things and looking at what supports were needed in that space to help to break that cycle of returning to violent situations. And ultimately, I guess for us, where we were looking at that and that sort of research and evidence came out in particularly the recovery and healing space. So essentially the services that we've designed and looking at the Rural Centre for Women and Children, which is a bigger piece, I guess, in the puzzle, in addition to the Carl-Up service, was really trying to focus in that recovery and healing space. So not taking away from all the great work that's already been done in crisis and in intervention, but looking at where that gap was. So I guess moving on to the next slide, if you could, thank you, is really looking at that collaborative approach to ending family and domestic violence. I think ultimately, obviously, for all of us in the sector, that is certainly our end goal in terms of ending family and domestic violence. And within each of our organisations and services, we play a role in that. So it's not something that we can do on our own. And certainly the Rural Centre for Women and Children and the Carl-Up service recognises that we are just a piece in that puzzle, but a really important piece in terms of how we can look at Carl-Up service providing that recovery and healing space to complement the services that are currently existing out there already. And again, I don't want to harp on it, but I think it really is about recognising that so much work and effort does go into supporting the women and children that we're working with in this space. And obviously there are perpetrator programs in that as well. But quite often, once the women and children are returning to their situation, or if they are going into a violent situation, they don't always have that wraparound support once they leave the crisis service to be able to continue to build those skills to help gain that control back in their life. So again, that's why we really went into that healing and recovery space. So moving on to the actual Rural Centre for Women and Children itself. So I'm sure you have seen through different avenues the kind of communications that have come out about the centre. So it's 29 Shenton Street in the city for us, and it really has been a purpose-built facility across those 7 stories to look at how we can provide those wraparound services for women and children in this space. We are looking at actual practical completion of the building this week, which is a really exciting milestone for us. And obviously then there's a lot of work to do around actually fitting the building out itself. But ultimately, you know, this has been a 4-year project, and you know, I'm relatively new into the rural space, so I certainly take my hats off to the project team who've been working on this now for a number of years. The building itself really has been designed in that trauma-informed way in terms of the neutral colours and the layouts, and provides a really welcoming and safe space when you walk into it, so that women and children do feel really safe. Talking about lived experience group, we have a really amazing group of lived experience advocates who've been part of the co-design of this building and the service in itself. And I had the privilege on my first day, certainly at Rural, walking around the building while it was still a building site with them, and to hear their feedback around how they had felt heard in that co-design process. So really simple things. When you walk into the ground floor, our reception is not actually on the ground floor because they said we would feel safer if it was on the first floor. So we don't feel so exposed walking in those doors that someone might follow us in there. So logical things that I'm sure we think of in that space, but really having the women feel heard in that design has contributed towards making it the space that it is. That is an actual photo of the building. So it is a 7-storey building which will contain the Carl-Up service. We do have safe accommodation, which I'll touch on a little bit more in terms of what we're offering from the building, and also Rua's administration floors, so where our current Subiaco team will be moving out there as well and working from the building. So moving on to the actual CarLup service itself and what it is, as I mentioned, CarLup's sort of situated over 2 levels of the building. So it's really that integrated recovery and healing service, which provides women and children with that wraparound support and holistic support. So it's really taken from that hub model. And what we want to work on to really continue to build on that hub model is about how we get all of those services to be very integrated in that space. So where we do have the suite of offerings that you can see on the screen there. So Quarter Guides, which is essentially our case management team, and Quarter means trusted one or trusted friend in Noongar. We will have counsellors, so children will have dedicated counsellors as well as the women entering the service, peer support, financial counselling. We will have a really fantastic medical practice where we have a GP and a registered nurse who'll be working from the service. We'll also have a nurse practitioner and a mental health nurse who will complement that service as well. Similarly, we have Healing Smiles, which is an amazing organisation providing dentistry services to women. Their current criteria as a service is it's volunteer dentists who really dedicate their time to providing that support to women who have been impacted by family and domestic violence as well. So they'll be able to operate from the centre, legal support, alcohol and drug support, housing support and recovery and healing programs. So within all of that, as I said, we'll all be using the same system. So again, it goes back to those simple principles that we all work with around women not having to retell their story. Even our GPs and our nurses and our dentists who'll be working in the service that are external providers to this will also be using our case management system and our booking and referral system. So again, it's that continuity of service really across all of the different offerings. In addition to the ones that you can see on the screen there, as we build the service, so we are looking at starting at sort of a 50% capacity because it's really important to us that we get this model right and that we can be flexible and adapt and change to the needs of the women and children as they start to come into the service. We'll also have things like disability advisors, cultural coordinators, adult education and child education programs as well. So again, we know that these are the types of offerings that have been fed back to us in terms of the consultation that we did to design the service. But obviously, once women are in the service, those things might change and they may think we need more counselling service. That's really what we're seeing everybody wanting to access, or they might not be accessing one of the supports in there. So what can we change and adapt to really make sure that we're providing the best level of services that we can? In terms of the offerings as well, it's up to the women and the children in terms of what offerings they choose to access. So through their Quarter Guide as case management, they may want to see all of those different offerings and may require that support across everything. But obviously we will have women who might just want to see a lawyer for a couple of appointments, and that's the support that they feel they need in that recovery and healing journey. If we flip over to the next slide, which really leads into the referral criteria for us, you'll see the referral criteria is quite broad. We really wanted to have a no barrier approach to the service where we could. So client identifies as a woman. So obviously if we do have individuals accessing the service who identify as transgender female, we will certainly welcome them into the service as well. As I've mentioned, we're talking about it not being a crisis service, which can obviously be quite subjective across the people referring as well as us within the sector. So how we've really tried to define that is around the current being safe and not in immediate risk of harm, so not requiring that emergency services support. Obviously, there's a criterion there around being affected by FDV. One of the great things I think that has been built into this service is that there is no time frame for that. So we know that recovery and healing journey is obviously not linear, and people will move through that at different stages and will have things go on in their life that will move them into different stages of crisis and things like that as well. But ultimately, if it's been 20 years since you experienced family and domestic violence and you're still on that recovery and healing journey, there's no time frame in which you need to have experienced that to access the service. And on the other end of that, there's really no time frame in terms of how long you can be supported within CarLup service. So I appreciate that quite often we can be restricted by a number of sessions and funding and things like that. We're very fortunate to be able to say to women, if you want to access this service for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, whatever that might be, as long as they're gaining some benefit and feel that they're really developing the skills or whatever it is that they might need in that space, we can provide that support to them. The client doesn't require emergency accommodation. So as I spoke about briefly at the start, we do have safe accommodation as one of the CALUP service offerings that is available. Essentially, what that will do is free up crisis beds in refuge. So all of the referrals that we'll be taking, certainly in the early days, will be coming from refuge referrals. So I'll talk a little bit more about the referral process and what that looks like. But essentially, again, it is for women and children who are not requiring that emergency accommodation side of things. We have 13 units within our safe accommodation. They're made up of studio apartments, 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom apartments. So we can obviously cater to different clients in that space. In terms of the children's side of things, we have been asked some questions. We will be taking children into that space, including male children up to the age of 17, ultimately. So we're not restricting that age limit, again, which is something we quite often have to do in the refuge space. So we want to, again, make that really accessible to the clients coming through. And ultimately, the way that we've modelled our safe accommodation is that it's quite independent living is how I would describe it. So it's really transitional for those women and children who are ready to come out of that crisis refuge space, who are ready to kind of start walking into that healing journey for themselves, and step back into community. So for us, we will have staffing up there 24/7, but it really is a minimal staffing model. So there'll be one support worker or a peer worker who will rotate through that space so that the women feel that, similar to what they would experience renting a property, they're able to come and go from the safe accommodation and really feel like it is a home space to them. And those of you who might have attended tours with us who've seen that space, it is a really lovely space in which it has that community feel for it, but they are all individual units that they have access to. Similarly, we have joining doors in those rooms as well. So where we do have larger families that might have 7 or 8 children, where it can be really difficult to find accommodation for the whole family, we have that ability to be able to be quite flexible in those unit spaces as well, so that if we do need to open them up to accommodate larger families, we're able to do that. And then finally, that last criteria on there around the client being 18 years or older. It is one of our key criteria, but what I would say to that is we'll also look at that on a case-by-case basis. So where we do have clients coming through, so we might have some women who are 16, 17 who really want to access the service. They too might have children of their own in that space. We will do mature minors assessments where that's appropriate, so that if they are suitable to come in as clients and be treated as adults in that situation, we'll do that assessment to make sure it's appropriate for them as well. Moving on to the referral pathways. Again, we've tried to keep this as open and as flexible, obviously, as possible. So anyone can self-refer into the service. When they first access that referral form, it will go through the criteria and ask them to tick off essentially on that criteria to make sure they're suitable for service. It'll obviously be referrals from external organisations and other service providers as well. So you can refer your clients through to us. They can call us. They can walk into the CALUP service itself on Shenton Street and we'll support that client. Obviously, if we do have walk-ins that come into the centre who might not be suitable because they are really seeking crisis accommodation or crisis support, we will have workers on that ground floor, peer workers, and obviously through our reception and the team and our quarter guides who will support them into the appropriate services as well. So although it might not be there suitable for that service at that time, we'll obviously want to continue to support them in finding the appropriate pathway for them to get the support that they need. One of the big pieces, and I guess going back to that really collaborative approach for us, by no means are we experts or will we have the expertise to suit every need of the women and children that we're seeing. So equally as important to us is really building those connections to local services, service providers who have that specialist expertise and knowledge in different areas that we're not able to provide that support within the actual CALUP service itself. So we will have our team who, already have great established relationships with many of you out in the sector, but really want to continue to build those relationships because we really want to make sure that this service supports everyone in the sector, and hopefully as we receive referrals from you, we can free up some of your service to take on the clients that you would have on your wait lists as well, as much as we want to be able to make sure that we can direct people through to you where you do have that expertise to support them. And as I've mentioned, really in that safe accommodation space, it's about freeing up a crisis accommodation bed. We know that unfortunately, there's never enough beds available to meet the demand. So by having this safe accommodation, where it is really difficult for people now with the housing crisis to be able to move into rentals and things like that, or even social housing, those types of things, hopefully it, as I said, frees up crisis beds for services out there. One of the things that you'll see when our referral forms do go live and we start taking referrals is that we talk about the offerings in that referral form, so we can get a bit of an indication of what clients are seeking in that space. We haven't specifically listed the safe accommodation as part of that because we will only be taking those referrals from Refuge. So anyone who's working in those space, there is a box where you talk about the reason for referral. We would just ask you to note it in that section as well. Because we don't want to set an expectation, obviously, with 13 units. If we open that up more broadly, we would anticipate, obviously, a lot of people seeking that accommodation. So we really want to be quite refined in how we start that when we open the service. Moving on to the next slide, the other part, obviously, at an individual level, this service has really been developed to support women and children who've been impacted by FDV. The other big part of it and how we're kind of framing it is that Carl-Up service is really a learning service as well. So in terms of the research and evaluation side of things, we're again really fortunate that we've been able to bring together a university consortium. So it's led by UWA, where we're really looking at that research and evaluation, not just at an individual level and how we can improve our service and evolve, but also at that systems level. So Carl-Up service is ultimately a recovery and healing model of care. So we want to be able to look at how that model of care works in the bigger sector. Are the offerings that we have within the service making a difference? If so, which of those offerings are making the difference and potentially which aren't? So we want to be able to really look at it from a whole lot of angles, because ultimately for us, and one of the really great things that brought me into her as well and how we talked about this service is that if this model of care works, it's something that we really want to be able to share widely with communities and across the sector, that if it's something that is going to help us all to end family and domestic violence in the long run, then let's share that. And then there might be future organisations who are able to set up similar services and things like that in the space. So we have a postdoctoral research fellow who'll be really working alongside those universities that we have for 3 years, who'll be able to do some of that more longitudinal research and evaluation follow-up with our clients as well. So as well as that immediate feedback that we're going to get around the data collection and what we're seeing happening in that space, we'll also be able to gather some of that long-term information as well, as I said, to see which components of that healing and recovery model work and which ones potentially don't work in that space. And fortunately, through the funding that we have received both philanthropically and through communities, we're in a position that we're able to be really responsive to those needs. So as that data comes to light, on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, those types of things, we'll really be able to see where those things are happening and make the changes and be really responsive to that, potentially rather than waiting 6 and 12 months as we do progress reports and those types of things. We can be a lot more receptive. And then finally, I guess just popping onto the last slide, we obviously have some interesting tours, and we certainly want to welcome the sector to be able to come out and have a look at the space. We recognise that really helps in terms of being able to talk to the clients that you have that might be suitable for referrals through to us. To understand the service, really be able to get that picture and visualise what that looks like for everyone, and be able to come along for a tour. So hopefully, if you've got your phones on you, I just wanted to leave that slide up for a couple of minutes. You will see on there we've got some scheduled dates throughout August, which we're opening up for organised tours of the centre. Obviously, once we do open the service, which at this stage is scheduled for mid-October, we will be going live in the service. We won't be able to offer so many tours in that space. So if you are interested in coming out and having a look at the building and hearing a little bit more about Carl-Up service, please scan that QR code and select the dates available. Obviously, depending on the interest that we get in that, if we do need to put on more dates, we'll be able to do that as well. We will be looking to open referrals to the service start of September at this stage, obviously, so that come the service actual open day in mid-October, we'll have clients who will be able to come in for their appointments and obviously being able to then move into safe accommodation, which will be a couple of weeks after we open the Carl-Up service itself, just so everything is safe and ready to go. But yeah, ultimately, we'd love to see you come out. Happy to answer any questions that you might have on the service as well. We really want to work closely with the sector in this space. And as I said, really open to taking referrals from all of the services that are on board to help in your service, and obviously ultimately help the women and children that we want to be able to see, and hopefully form those links that we'll be able to refer them out to the sector as well. That's it from me. So I'll throw back to you, Nicole, but certainly if there are any questions that come up in the Q&A, happy to answer those as needed.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. I'll actually ask my team to flick back to the Suzanne's last slide so we can keep that QR code up there while we're going through questions. It's wonderful to hear about the progress of the Rural Centre for Women and Children. So thanks for taking us through that, and also for making the tours available to people. I've been on the tour myself, and it was actually, yeah, quite amazing to talk through how each of the aspects of the building have been informed by those various governance groups, but particularly people with lived experience. So I'm going to start with the Q&A process, and I'll just read through the questions and then and answer them as best I can. Please, if you've got any questions for Suzanne or I, pop them in the chat and we'll work through as many as we can in the remaining time. So the first question is, will the department set up a regular forum for engaging with sector representatives to support continued progress, action and evaluation for the FDV strategy? The short answer to that question is yes, absolutely we will and are. So we're currently working with the Centre for Women's Safety and Wellbeing and with Stopping Family Violence around exactly that, a sector forum that provides a clear kind of point of engagement for discussion about particularly the system reform plan, but also all the associated project and design work that is occurring in that space. So it is happening and we will be able to provide an update on it soon. In respect of lived experience, the question and comment is, it would be beneficial in also recognising that there is a high percentage of lived experience in the sector. Recent communication could be seen as dismissing the experiences and benefit and impact of people within organisations and sector already. Thank you for sharing that comment with me. I certainly take that on board, and I might go back and have a look at our communications and make sure that that it's very clearly acknowledged. This probably isn't answering this comment question that clearly, but establishing lived experience advisory groups is, I suppose, an emerging practice in most states and territories in the area of gender-based violence, and particularly in the area of family and domestic violence. We've seen Commissioner Cronin establish her group last year, which Alison Scott is a member on. I think, you know, in the discussions that I've been privileged to have about that practice, central to a lot of those discussions is exactly that point about how do we actually recognise that much of our existing family violence specialist support and specialist sector is built on lived experience already by virtue of such a high proportion of staff and such a high proportion of our key leaders in that space having had lived experience themselves. So I just wanted to acknowledge that that's something that that we are very well aware of. It's not intended that this group would be limited to or would preclude people who have lived experience who might also be working in this space, but I think we could certainly do a better job of acknowledging and recognising that much of what has paved the way to where we are now, but has been done over the years and still currently to really build the specialist services and responses that we have, is through lived experience and people with lived experience really driving that change in our community. So we will do a better job of communicating that in our discussions about the group. We've got a question here about requesting an update on the prevention grants. So thank you for the question. I am actually pleased to say that the prevention grants, the procurement process is very, very well progressed. So we had a very high number of applications. We had over 70 applications. So it did take time to really thoroughly work through all of those and take them through an assessment process. So that is concluded. The report and recommendations have been prepared and they're at the final stage of approval. So I would expect that there will be communications and announcements about the prevention grants in the very near future, but to set a time frame around it, I would say within the next 2 to 4 weeks. So you can expect to hear the outcome of those very soon. The next question and comment is, state and federal government have prioritised capital and infrastructure funding for victim survivors. Does the state government have budget allocated for operational funding to enable organisations to increase their capacity? So the short answer to that question is no. There is no provisional fund for operations for expanded premises. But what I would ask is that organisations in receipt of funding or organisations intending to apply for funding, that you reach out as early as is possible and early as is realistic in a process like that, and that we start having a discussion about what the implication is for your organisation of the expanded size. So I think, you know, we will do everything that we can to try and find solutions. Ultimately, we want to attract this money to Western Australia. We want capital investment. We want to expand our capacity. So I just encourage anyone who either has had funding already or is, you know, well progressed in an application around funding, that you get in contact with the office. And I suppose on that same point, we are very well aware about the Commonwealth commitments, and we have been asking through all the avenues to get better visibility and clarity about what that funding is going to look like and what the processes are going to be to apply for that funding. At this stage, I don't have all that much visibility to offer you, but as soon as we do have that detail, then we will share it either via webinar or through out of session communication via email. I think everybody would be aware of the $1 billion committed by the Commonwealth Government earlier this year around the National Housing Infrastructure Fund, and that was part of their announcements that came along with the extension of funding for the escaping or the leaving violence payment. But there's also been another announcement, which I actually think occurred last year, but which I don't have very good visibility on, and we'll get some more information for you, of $100 million around another housing fund that the Commonwealth will administer. And this, of course, is in addition to the Safe Places Inclusion Round funding, which we have now seen the Commonwealth make announcements around. So capital investment and funding for capital investment around crisis and supported accommodation for victim survivors of family and domestic violence is clearly an area of strong interest for the Commonwealth Government. There's a lot of money being made available for it. So we would be very keen to see that money come to Western Australia and go to those places where we know has high levels of unmet need and demand. So this question is, what is the length of safe housing tenancies? So Suzanne, I'll hand that one to you, please.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And apologies, I should have mentioned that as I spoke. So we're working on a 12-week, 3-month sort of basis for the safe accommodation, but again, recognising that we're obviously in a bit of a housing crisis at the moment. So it's not that we will exit people to homelessness by any means once that sort of 12-week period has passed. We will, as part of those wraparound services, really have that housing support worker who work quite intensively in continuing to build on the work that refuges do with clients, obviously in terms of already having them on the priority housing list and those types of things. So they will engage obviously with our housing support worker in that space, and we'll continue to support them until they find accommodation.
That's great, thank you. So next question is, can I please provide an indication of the timeline for the rollout of the FB coordinator roles out into FDBRTs in the regions? Yes, so thank you for the question. And sorry, I can feel that I'm about to sneeze, so excuse me. So part of the announcements in the 24-25 state budget was to bring forward funding that had already been committed by the government to roll out 2 family safety service positions in every family and domestic violence response team. So these are workers that are Department of Community staff, but they are non-statutory. So in terms of the structure of our organisation, they're line managed through our child protection district officers, but they're not child protection workers. So their role is to work alongside the family and domestic violence response team, and they have a very clear and specific defined remit, which is around high risk, high harm cases and coordinating multi-agency case management for those cases. So they have a case management role with the families directly, as well as that role and function around coordinating case management around those families. So we had 14 of those workers roll out in 23-24, and the remaining, which is another 20, will be coming online over the next 3 months. So we actually have already been through the process of advertising those roles on Seek and on jobs.wa.gov.au, as well as other places. For the 20 positions, we had individual applications from 218 people and 289 applications. So we have been through all of those. We're in the final stages of that recruitment process in terms of interviewing, and we expect that those individual applicants will be notified with an outcome soon, at which time we'll be starting to communicate those outcomes with regions and communities about what that process is going to look like for the introduction of those roles. So it is well progressed, but as everyone would be experiencing at that moment, that transition period around getting new staff actually into their seats and started can take a little bit of time, just so that people are giving appropriate notice to the place that they are leaving, in recognition of how difficult it can be to find staff at the moment. So we expect that those people will be coming online in FDVRTs over the next couple of months. So that is the last question that I can see on the list. I'll just get my team to flick to the last slide. As always, if you've got a question or if something comes up or that you think of in between webinars, please don't hesitate to send it to us and we can answer it kind of out of session. But in between this webinar and the next one, I expect that you will start to get visibility to a range of things, including the primary prevention grants outcome. We'll start to talk to people about the way the sector is going to be engaged and built in around that governance arrangement for the system reform plan and the implementation oversight group. We probably won't have any further outcomes to announce around the lived experience advisory group, but that process will close in between this and the next webinar. And we have a number of other procurements which are on foot, which I haven't spoken about today, but perhaps I'll bring to the next webinar to update you on their progress and outcome. And that's inclusive of the new men's behaviour change programs and safe at home programs. So among other things, but we can provide an update further on those at the next webinar. So please can I extend my thanks again to Suzanne for your time today. It was great to hear from you and hear about progress of the Rural Centre for Women and Children, and thank you all for your time. As always, we appreciate you joining us, and we'll circulate the slides out after the webinar's finished. So thank you very much, everyone.